Okay, so I'm going to ask you another question. Let's dive into some TMF questions and then we can go back to some more behavioral questions.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah, I like to go back and forth and kind of flip around a little bit. So, because you never know what you're going to get or what you start off with.
Right.
Tell me about what you know about, and this is a longer question. What do you know about the 1572? And when do you use it? And or what do you use it for? And what's on it?
So the 1572 would be a form that um, helps inform the FDA about some of the things about the clinical trial. Some of those things would be like the primary investigator, who that person is, some of their information, all the sub-investigators, also like maybe the name of the trial or the drug that's being studied, along with some codes. And oh, and the lab address and like what information on the laboratory or where the trial is actually happening.
Awesome. Great. That's a very, very solid answer. A lot of people, it's one, do you know it's from the FDA? Do you know what it is and what's on it? And then a couple other points that I would expand on. But again, you don't have to. Your answer was 100% solid, but this might get you to the 110%.
Okay.
I like to mention that the document, and before you actually interview, like look over the document, like know it 100%. And the document is basically a testament from the investigator saying, I'm going to do this. They have to sign the document. So I'd mentioned that there's a signature line for the investigator, and it's them agreeing to do the best job they can, basically, right? And it's them saying, I'm in charge of this site, basically. So if something goes wrong with their patients, they are actually legally, they need to do it, and the company can't actually, we can advise as a sponsor,
Mm-hmm.
but they are the decision maker for their patient's care. So if the drug is doing something funky and they don't like it, they can pull out patients, they can do things. And they also, part of that is they acknowledge that if they do things that is not to the protocol, sometimes they'll get a protocol deviation. And that if they do something, sometimes I've seen where if they give them certain medication that they're not supposed to, and again, if they feel they need to, they can. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they do it by accident. Um, then they can no longer be a part of the study, right? So sometimes things happen that will disqualify the person, and that ruins the data for the company, and the company spent all this money on it. But in general, the head doctor, the principal investigator, is in
Mm-hmm.
charge. Now he
Okay.
can delegate things, but he's really supposed to be responsible for everything, like even what goes on in their labs, like kind of like everything that happens, he's responsible, and he delegates responsibility out to other people, but at the end, he's the responsible one.
So knowing all that information, I understand it would take me to 110,
Yes.
but for a document specialist, they're not necessarily needing to know all that. Is that correct? So
Yes.
much as like
Yeah, so it's just
other
additional thing,
roles.
but if you can say that, and maybe not to the full extent I did, but if you can say 1572, what you said, and then if you say there's also a signature line that I look
Mm-hmm.
for to make sure that it's signed.
Okay.
And then another thing that you would say for a document specialist position, that's kind of like midway, right? Maybe it's like between normal and senior, is you would say, I utilize the document to make sure for a completeness review, right? So I kind of mentioned what's on the document and what do you use it for. And a lot of people don't do the second part of what do you use it for. You use it for the fact that it's like a good overview for the entire site, and you can use that to figure out, okay, here's the list of sub-investigators. How many CVs do I need? How many medical
Mm-hmm.
licenses do I need? How many trainings do I need? So it's kind of like this template document. And then you'd be like, do I need, another thing you'd mention is what lab stuff do I need? Because for each lab, you're going to want a CLIA and a CAPA. Now, if you can mention that, that's almost like senior level, and that's really good. Now I want you to answer these questions at a senior level because you're going to have lack of experience, and I want them to see you have lack of experience, but you have exceeding senior knowledge, right? That's how
Yeah.
you're going to ideally
So
get the
I'll have to
job.
look up things like CLIA and Kappa, which
Yes,
I've never heard of
yes,
before.
exactly, and that's totally fine. And again, on Tuesday, we're going to try to work through some documents. because I do think there are a lot of documents, and you don't have to know all of them, but that's an advantage of somebody who maybe has lower knowledge, right? And they don't know anything about regulations or anything, and they don't care. They're just there to do the work. But even if they're like a lower performer than you are, if they've been doing it for a year, the thing that they have an advantage on is that they've seen the documents, and they're going to be a little bit more familiar because they spent a year filing it and be like, oh, that's an IP shipment that goes here, right? They're just going to have a little bit more knowledge and recognizing the documents. Now, the documents tend to be different company per company, right? Like one of them, like I just mentioned, is the document that comes from the site that says, hey, we received the drug. And that acknowledgement of receipt form looks almost guaranteed to be different company to company in terms of like the header and what it has and what order the boxes are in, but they're pretty much the same gist. And if you're familiar, you can be like, oh, I know what that is. And it'll say acknowledgement of receipt or IP shipment form or something, but that's something that somebody who's been doing it for a year will have an advantage, is the fact they're just more familiar with the documents. So I'd like to get the group up. That's what the next kind of phase is. You guys are pretty good at QCing, and I feel like you've done the work. Now can I get you guys to be really familiar with the documents? And that's what on Tuesday, hopefully we'll show the documents and like go over which ones are which and stuff. And just continue to do that maybe through all the documents or something, might take us a little while. Okay, but overall, great answer. Like your answer, totally acceptable for entry level coming in to, but if we can get you to answer senior, that would be great. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
We'll go through this again and again. So you have plenty of time to practice. Okay, one question that I've been asked, which I'm not too sure, is kind of what is the difference between a TMF inventory and a TMF inspection readiness QC? And I just kind of want your honest thoughts on the question. Also to test you, what do you do when you're not super familiar with the question?
I've come across those terms, and I'm not positive about that, but I'm sure that once I look them up in the TMF reference file, I would be able to figure it out very quickly.
Okay, great answer. Great. Totally fine to not know an answer. And I almost like to throw in a couple when I interview people, maybe usually at the end, especially if I think somebody is very scripted, to give them a kind of a trickier question just to see, like, I don't even care what their response is. I want to see how they handle themselves in like an unknown situation. So great.
Yeah.
Usually you just go ahead.
Something that I came across very regularly in my past is people asking questions, because I did work with public. So it was super easy to just use all those resources that are available, do Google, do the search. They came to me because they knew I had the knowledge to find the right answers, not necessarily because I had all the right answers.
Exactly. Yep. You can always research things, look things up. You don't have to always know something right away, which actually good. I will use that to jump into a great question. If that doesn't give away the answer. What do you do when you don't know? Like you started a job, you've been trained, and you get your first task, and you're not too sure what to do. What do you do?
Yeah, this goes back to maybe me just being really self-sufficient. So I will rely on the tools that I have. I'm sure, I have a lot of PDFs already, and I'm sure you're going to have more standard operating procedure books, or maybe other PDFs that I can do quick searches, or use Google, just whatever it takes to find the answer. And of course, sometimes there are occasions where you have to go to someone else because it's not clear after you do your due diligence. So yeah, that would be the way to do it. But I think a biggest mistake would be to just sit there not knowing the answer and not willing to reach out if that was necessary.
Yeah, 100% perfect. Again, Hilary quality answer. I'm very impressed. It was funny because I interviewed with Max and we went over the order of what I want to hear. There's multiple answers. I just ask somebody, I look it up. I use my notes. There's a lot of different answers you can give. The perfect answer, in my opinion, is I use my resources. I use my notes. I use whatever SOPs have been given to me, and that's step one. You do that. Step two, if you've exhausted your resources, you can either ask somebody if it is something that you think is like very company specific, or you Google YouTube if it's something more like Viva or like a system specific thing.
Right.
You just, or like you're trying to learn how to do something in Word and someone's asked you to format something and you saw them do it, but you're like, what did they do? I think it's better to turn to other sources, and then you can always follow up with the person after. You'd be like, okay, this is what I found, this is what I think I remember, even if you like
Mm-hmm.
YouTubed it, and then you can confirm with them. But that's like the perfect. I don't want, ideally, as a manager, people coming to me and be like, how do I do that again? You're like, okay, but I wrote it down. Like we went over this, right? Now I'm not like super offended by that. But one of my previous colleagues that we would do interviews together for the group, she hated when people, their first answer was, oh, I just asked. And she was just like, man, we hire people and they just constantly, like, they don't take notes. That was like her biggest pet peeve. Like, she wanted people to bring a notepad, even if they like didn't
Mm-hmm.
take notes. She, like, it was like a quality, is she wanted people to take notes, and she just felt like it was what they did. And so yes, so she really wanted people to avoid saying ask, which is not a bad response, but the perfect response, I turn to my resources,
Right.
SOPs, my notes, anything I can find.
And I think some
Um,
of that is manager specific as well, because some of
yeah,
them genuinely might, no, you need to make sure it's right. Come to me,
yeah,
but it's all going to be situational.
yeah. It's all gonna be
And
situational. Oh, go ahead.
hopefully you can read that room or
Yeah.
situation. Yeah.
Or you can just wrap it up with that. What I sometimes like to do is to say that I don't spend too long. You also don't want someone who's going to sit there and like reread all the SOPs. When again, you can also just search it. So I like that you said that you can search. Um, so like you pull up the PDFs and just search for it, versus you don't have to sit down and like retrain yourself like for 4 hours to try to find the answer. Um, just take a quick look, search for it, scan the stuff, check your notes, which shows that you also just take notes, and then you say, once I think I have the answer, I usually will ask and clarify unless I'm very clear, unless I have it very distinctly in my notes and I do it. Because that answers, in my opinion, that series answers everybody's desires. If somebody who wants you to ask them, you've done some work that show you're a hard worker, but you didn't waste time, and then you still ask them. So you'd like do some pre-work.
Yeah.
So that's my go-to for that one.
Thank you.
Yes, and again, it's like these are my long-winded like advice and notes on these, but I think it's useful. Um, okay, this is one I didn't do earlier. What are things you like about the TMF, and what are things that you don't?
I like it's almost black and white, and I do like that. I like that it's got that order to it. There's not a lot of ambiguity from what I've observed so far, and it does serve a purpose so that a greater purpose can be achieved. And sometimes I think that's important to recognize when you're doing grunt work in general. But I am someone who enjoys I come in, I have the stack, I work through the stack, and it's like me and that work. And I feel like there would be a lot of that with this TMF, with the TMF duties. It, does that sound like I know what I'm talking about?
Yes, yeah, no, it's perfect. I would not start with the clear cut, but I think it's a good thing. You just put that in the middle. I would
Mm-hmm.
start with, I like to be organized,
Mm,
and the TMF is like an organizational, and then you kind of did answer it. I think you would say, instead of saying things, because you don't want to say, oh, I don't like the job, right? So you don't really want to answer the what do you not like, but what you can say is, I think other people would find the work tedious and more like grunt work, and maybe not less interactive, but as I mentioned, I actually, prefer to have it where I'm just one-on-one with me in the work. I definitely feel like I'm a good team player, but in my previous position, I had to deal with the public and kind of asking the public and working with my clients. And I definitely felt like that wasn't my favorite part of my previous job. And
yeah.
I think I would look forward to just being either me in the work or me and somebody that's kind of being paid for to do the work. Because I like that what you said, we said earlier, where you're fine asking people for stuff or working with people, when it's their job
It's the
versus like,
expectation,
yep,
right? Where a
no,
client's hiring me and yeah, they're
and
just
you're like,
trying to
yeah,
live
it's
their
kind of a
free
weird,
time and
yeah.
I'm trying to keep my regulatory officials happy by reaching out to them. So,
Yeah. No, I think it's good. And I definitely think you want to continue to remind that in the sense that you don't want to not seem like a people person, right? But it's a good sell for why you would like the job. So I think it's, a fine line, and I think you're treading it perfectly. So that's, I think, great. I think you mentioned grunt work. That's my go-to for why you potentially wouldn't, why would somebody not want to do the job? And then organization, purpose, you nailed that. The way I usually say it is I think the TMF is a wonderful opportunity to play a small role in a big picture that can literally save lives. I am excited
mhm,
about the idea that if I work on a study and I help them have all their documents in order, that they might pass their inspection. And then patients will get this drug that they need, and their
mhm.
lives might be saved or dramatically improved. And that brings me joy. Like, and anything I can do to be a part of that would be amazing. And I personally feel that way. I like that's not just
Well, that's why you're doing well, because
laying it on.
right, if you didn't feel that way, I don't think you'd be where you are in your career.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love this. I like wake up and I'll be like, I would do this for free, but shh, don't tell anyone. Like I
Yeah,
absolutely love this.
yeah.
But yes, I think the purpose, and when if you say that, no matter what you say in the interview, you'd probably get the job. Like that somebody who wants to be there is something that I find so hard to deduce from a resume in an interview. And there's lots of people I've hired that just eventually don't really want to be there, and it's really hard as a manager to deal with that. So if you can
Hmm.
come out front in the interview and be like, I want to do this, I want to be there, you have a really solid shot. Okay, I'm gonna do, I know I've taken a lot of your time. I wanna do one more quick key behavioral question that I ask every single person I interview because I think
Okay.
it's so telling on everything. What do you do when you have a colleague that you don't get along with?
Hmm. I am a pleaser, so in the sense I work with them. I recognize, okay, this person's different than what I am, and I don't like to assign somebody else as being right or wrong versus me being right or wrong. Hopefully, it's just a situation where we're different or we do things differently. So yeah, just continue to go to work. I've experienced a lot of other people coming to me and
Mhm.
complaining about others in the office because they know that I have that white get along with everybody personality. So I don't like that because I don't want to propagate like, oh, can you believe like so I'm not the one who's like, can you believe XYZ doing XYZ? But I do prefer to, hey, let's talk about what the issue is if it's an issue that needs to be addressed. Because genuinely they might just be drinking their water in a way that someone else doesn't like. And is that really
Mm,
an issue? I don't think so. Maybe someone just needs to get over that. But in some cases, people are malicious and that would have to be addressed.
good, good, solid answer. Now I am going to, and this is on the interview guide that I'll send you afterwards.
Yeah.
I do ideally want you to answer each question in the STAR format, which is situation, task, action, result. And you can write it down, but it'll be in the document. I'll send you right
Okay.
away. Um, but I'll talk about it a little bit. It's really important because this is what companies want to see, and I've seen this in most things I've come across. And recruiters have told me, please answer in this format. Hiring people have trained me, make sure you're looking for this. And just this management book I was just reading talked about this too. They
Mm,
also added like I think like kind of like what was the object. They tried to make their own version, but it was basically the same thing.
yeah.
Situation, task. They're trying to sell the book,
Yeah,
they gotta do
that's
something.
what it is.
Yeah.
Same content, different format.
Yeah, exactly. Which I'll actually send you the book too. It's somebody in my church, and I do think having a manager perspective helps you with your job and interviews and anything you do, in the sense that if you're viewing what does my manager want, you just succeed extremely well in your job, right? Because you're like constantly thinking about that. But
Mm,
back to the subject, Star format, you want to answer every question like you've been doing. For example, the 1572, you wouldn't do that. You're just answering the question. But in most times when they ask you the behavioral questions, like tell me about a time with a difficult employee, or what do you do with a difficult employee, they kind of want to see if you're going to give them a story. And that's what you want to do. You want to give them a situation, the kind of like, what was the task at hand? Like, what was the action that you took? And what was the result? And then one benefit that in my recent interview prep that I did, and a lot of people told me, the result is not just like the one result, which is what most people do. The result, you want to be like, so we had a conflict, we resolved it, and then the result is that our relationship moving forward, me and this colleague, was way better. And as a result, the team worked better. And as a result, we got stuff done faster. And as a result, like the company profited.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was just my interview because for some reason they wanted me to tie in everything to like the company, and they called it like the enterprise, which like a lot of people were like, what are we like Star Trek or something?
Yeah,
Like
no.
And my friend who had done the interview before me was like, man, I don't know, like she kept saying enterprise and I had no idea what she was talking about. But they wanted you to tie it to how does your action result for the company, like for like all the trickles. And then basically the way I did my interview is I kept on saying, and therefore the patients got more drug, or like the patients got the drug faster, the study got approved, like I try to always bring it back to the patients.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, in a conflict, you wouldn't want to talk about that. But if at some point you can bring and talk about how if we are all more productive, then we can basically review TMF faster and have things more accurate. And therefore, the study gets approved and therefore patients get their drug. If you can try to squeeze that line in somewhere in your interview, that's huge because it shows you're thinking big picture. You get the idea, and that you have the ability to affect that. Not
Right.
everyone's thinking that way, right?
Well,
So
that's good feedback because as I was saying those things, I was thinking of the situations
yes.
without expressing the actual story of the situations.
Yep, and that's really common, and that's why people say answer in the star format and the best way to do it, in my opinion, and other people might differ from this, I don't want to go, oh, let me tell you a story. Like, and then I tell the story. I like to kind of
Mm-hmm.
give a summary sentence. Well, I had a situation with an employee, but we were able to resolve it. And, and maybe a little bit more detail than that, but give a kind of a summary sentence and then dive into the story. Because a lot of times when you're giving the situation, you want to keep it pretty brief, and that's hard because you're trying to give them context, but you can't. If you give them too much, you lose people. And I find that, at least for me personally, when I'm doing interview prepping and when I'm like in the interviews, when I'm like interviewing people, a lot of times I'm like, oh man, you've lost me. Like I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
and then they wrap it up. I'm like, oh good, thank you. You brought it, you closed the circle. So like if you're going to do a large summary of the situation, you definitely want to like pull in, and you kind of want to pull in what about your situation like resulted, like caused the results. Because sometimes people just give a lot of information. Um, and I'm very windy, so I try to be very conscious of that, and I try to keep my situation as like streamlined as possible while still giving all the key answers and kind of tips. And then just again, more kind of overall tips for interviews when you're doing the star format. We mentioned earlier that I do over prepare for interviews. What I like to do is to go through sample questions and just look through and basically write out every question I can, and basically
Mm.
in the star format, like what's the situation, what's the task, what's the action, and I will do this for like a lot of questions, right? Let's say like 20-30 questions. When you're not going to get asked 20-30 questions, right? You're
Right.
usually going to get asked like 3-4 maybe. And then what I like to do is look through all these and see, is there a trend? Do I have a couple key stories that answer kind of multiple questions, right? Because I usually do prepare for multiple situations, right? And so then I like to pick out 3 or 4 solid situations where I have good examples, and I feel like I can tweak the situation to cover different questions, right? So think about like 3 to 4 specific examples, situations, scenario you've been in that might be able to answer multiple questions. And then I basically have that story like memorized, right? Because I don't want, and again, you don't have to memorize things because you're just going to recall it, but the sooner you can recall it, just the better it
Hmm.
is, right? Because
And more refined, because
more
I'm
refined,
like,
yeah,
oh yeah, that detail, that
exactly.
versus I've already had it laid out.
Exactly. And to that point, I then don't print that out and try to take that with me or like hide it behind my screen where I have this huge thing, right? Because I've over prepared, right? And then if I try to, again, like if I do a church talk, I try to like read word for word or memorize word for word. I always mess up because I can't quite remember, or like I'll skip a sentence and then I'm like, oh, do I go back or what do I do?
Hmm.
So what I do is I write it all out. I have it really clearly and I try to memorize that. But then like the day before or whatnot, I turn those stories into like a bullet point or two, so I can remember the bullet point and I can have that written out as a little cheat sheet or whatever, or I can read that right as I go into the interview, or in my car right as I pull up to refresh myself on, okay, here are my stories and here's like the action, right? And then from there I can tell it, and I'm not caught up on the word for word detail of what I wrote out, but I'm prepared because I did write out the word for word detail. So again, total overkill, but it works, and so I recommend
Hmm.
it. And if
Okay,
people don't
that's
want to do
fair.
it, and if people don't want to do it, it's like it's a lot. You don't have to if you want to just put summaries in that you will recall. But I find that's the best. Also, another tidbit as you're getting ready for applying to things, and as I mentioned, we'll have recruiters reach out and try to help you. You want to apply to everything you can find online first. And then we're going to have you apply, and I'll try to get you connections with a whole bunch of solid recruiters I know. And then the third level is I have a whole bunch of recruiters that are like one-off recruiters that I don't know like how solid they are. I haven't like worked with them, and I usually assume they're not solid. But we'll mass send out your email, your resume, because there's no
Right.
harm, right? But that's like lower odds of something coming out of that effort. So first we'll do the good recruiters, and then later the less recruiters. But the flow of this is that you want to time it so ideally you're in your peak interview process altogether. And the jobs that you absolutely love, sometimes you want to kind of apply to potentially last in your what you do, because you want to having these interview preps as we're doing now and having interview experience as you're going through, even with me where I feel like I'm really good at interviewing, your third interview versus your first interview is going to be different.
Yeah.
You're going to be really good at what you're going to say because you've been saying it 2 other times. You like
Hmm.
went through this, and the little bit of nervousness, like you've gotten over that usually, or at least it's like the little edge is taken off. So that's why I like to apply to lots of positions, and I like to time it in that stages, because also the recruiter interviews, they're going to be a little bit more aggressive on you to give them an answer. They're going to like sometimes they'll give you like 24 or 48 hours. You usually can ask, oh, I need a couple days to think about it. But sometimes I've had ones push me like, I want an answer by end of day, and I'm like, I don't know if I can do that. But then you're like, but I like this job, like you're like
Yeah.
it's tricky. So that's why I do the recruiters wave too. You want to do it right after, but the recruiters are going to be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit quicker to get you the interview. But if you interview and they're after your interview, they're going to call the company and be like, "Hey, so what do you think of Spencer? Do you want to make him an offer?" So they're going to advocate on your behalf, and so as a result, that's good. But then when they turn around and they have the answer, they also want to get paid, so they're going to push you to take the job. So it's really good if you already have the offers for the other ones, so you know if you want to take the job. And they will definitely tell you things. They will convince you want this job. Like you definitely do have to like don't whatever you do, don't say yes in the thing, and like call me afterwards and we'll work through it and we'll talk about all your different offers and what you want to do. Because in the moment they really want you to commit. And it's just a sales tactic. They're going to want to make you commit in that moment. You can even say, I'll call you in half an hour, let me think about it, and they're usually cool with that. But they will definitely they will make strong cases for why you should take this job because they've just done all this work and they want to get paid, right? And if you
Yeah,
don't take it, they
yeah.
don't get it. So yeah, those are just my advice, thoughts. Any questions you have and just on that?
No, no, not right offhand. Actually, in your experience, which roles, because I noticed a lot of them are travel based. So
Yeah.
which roles do you think are more home? I just have a good internet connection based.
hmm Yeah. So a lot. Do you also part of your question like which ones will require you to go in or
Well, I mean, not necessarily go in, but like maybe I just saw that quite a few of them,
mhm.
like maybe they were CTA roles going to the actual sites.
That's pretty rare. And they usually a lot of times it's understandable. A lot of times companies will throw in up to 10% travel, up to 30% travel, up to 50% travel.
Hmm.
Usually it's way less than what they say. They just kind of want to like
Okay.
legally have you be bound to something.
Hmm.
So even when I've had fully remote positions, they'll try to say in there, well, we'd like to have 5% travel because if we want to have an offsite, we want to have like a yearly event, we want to be able to bring people in. And that's usually a really smart thing for companies that have remote employees. And per what I've read in management books and things like that, you want to bring everyone together at least like once a year, if not like twice or quarterly. Quarterly gets really expensive, so most don't.
Hmm.
But the team building interactions, like that day or two where you all get together and like get to know each other, is significant in the ability for you guys to work together. It's like off the charts, and people are like, "No, I work great from home," but like you build that trust really quickly in those 2 to 3 days.
So they are just saying that, okay, this could happen.
Yeah.
Because
Now,
I did see that on quite a few of
yeah,
the those roles.
yes. Now a CTM role will
Hmm.
have a lot more travel because you will sometimes go out to the site and you will conduct what's called an SIV, where you like introduce you as the company representative to the site, like the hospital that's doing the work, right? And
Hmm.
so, and if you have a 200 site study, that can be a lot of travel. Now, it's usually not just a CTM. A lot of times, it's actually the CRA that will do that role. Now, the CRA role is very travel heavy, right?
Okay, maybe it's those I was seeing
And
that
you
were
were
roles
maybe looking at
travel.
those ones. The CRA is like almost an exclusively travel role.
Okay.
Um, it's also very lucrative. And you don't. A lot of times, it's a kind of a cool role. I've done a couple things where I've like shadowed people, but I've always thought about doing it. Because you get to travel, like you get to kind of almost like see different cities and stuff, like
Hmm.
on a company dime. Like they fly you out there, and then you can take an extra day or two to go see Chicago. So it is kind of enjoyable in that sense. So it's really good for like for roles that like you don't have a whole bunch of kids and you can do it. You also learn a lot about how things operate. Like if you can squeeze in somewhere in your career a year or 6 months of being a CRA, it helps you in your overall career trajectory because you're just getting a little bit of a snippet of the site. Same thing goes for if we're looking for TMF roles for you and we don't find anything, or right now there's a lot, but a lot of times there's not always. Again, COVID helped with the remote aspect, but there's a study coordinator role, and that's a role at the site. Now
Okay.
that role tends to be in the office a lot of times. Now it's a little bit more hybrid. And again, if you're in Salt Lake City, there's a lot more study coordinator roles out there. There's a lot of different like institutions. A lot of research happens in Utah because where
Yeah.
else do you find a whole bunch of people who are pretty good at not smoking, not doing drugs, not drinking or whatever, or like obedient people? Like people actually talk about this in clinical research. They're like, oh, we're gonna run we got to do at least one study in Utah, or we're going to do our control study in Utah because Utah's actually like known for like a lot of clinical research because they're really compliant people. Like it's non-compliance
Yeah.
is a huge issue in clinical research. I had a study where they had to have a diet where you couldn't eat a lot of red meat, but the drug you took kind of took away the brain fog that they were having from eating meat. And they're like, oh, I want a hamburger. Like as soon as they felt good, we lost so many people. Like there was like this peak. People would feel good and then they would break it because they felt great.
That's
So like,
so funny.
it is
That's
really
funny.
funny. And we had to pay so much, especially especially because it wasn't instant. It was like 6 months into it. So you're paying for 6 months. It's really expensive. And then you lose the patient, and then we were like, what do we do? It was also like, it was young. A chunk of it was young. We were trying to get like 18-year-olds. Again, really high non-compliance group. And so that's like a young adult is like not the best in terms of doing what you tell them to do, but they're also the more willing to do research because they're like, oh, that's some cash. I could do this. I
Yeah.
got time, right? Who has time? So it's tricky. But yeah, so quick recap, study coordinator, you're there. If you can get some study coordinator experience at the site, it's really good and easy to get a CTA job after or a TMF job after because you know how the study runs from the site perspective. It's just like a unique view. Same thing with the CRA. You know what the CRAs are doing. So later, if you're like a CTM like me, and you know what they're doing and you know how hard their job is, like you can relate to them. You can have that empathy and you can think about how to make their life better or how you streamline things from that like empathetic point of view. So having a variety, and that's what's cool in clinical research is that no one had the right same path a lot of the time. There like is no set path. People just bounce all along. And my company actually specifies specifically on trying to make sure that people rotate. Like they do like rotations. They're doing this new thing where it's called flow to the work. Again, I told you like I volunteered to do like inspection readiness, right? They're trying to get people to flow so they all have different experiences because it's like proven that you're going to do better at your job if you have past experience. If you've done the same job for 10 years, you're good, but you peak out. There's like not after 2 years you've learned everything usually, and so like that you're not bringing anything else to the table. So yeah, so a wide variety of positions is really helpful, but in general the travel is pretty limited. The CTA might have a little bit more where they're wanting you to go out to the site. Super rare. It would be like once or twice for you to like experience it. And that's usually if you beg them to, right? So it's like not super common.
Like, please let me go.
Yeah. And people were like, I just signed up. I was like, hey, I want to do some conferences. And I just told them because I think they assume people don't want to travel. So it's like, hey, a heads up, I'm okay with that. Especially because I have a kid. Sometimes people are like, oh, has a kid, doesn't want to travel. I'm like, no, I'll find a sitter. Like, I think it'd be fun to go to a conference. But most people don't, right? So I had to like, I just vocalized that to my boss, just like a heads up. And the TMF usually has like close to no travel. There's like no real reason that they would want you. They might want you in for an inspection. That is once per the life of the study. Studies are usually like 5 years long or 2 to 5 years long, right? So very rare that they would want you in. They might want you in for an annual, like I said, off-site where everyone's get together and they bond. They might do that. They might do that twice a year. Sarah Ultragenics just had like a gala where they brought people in. And I think because they didn't have something the last year. Yeah, exactly. I might try to hang out with them and they're like, we have to get ready for our gala. And I'm like, fine, we won't do ice cream before.
Is it gala or gala? I don't even know.
Yeah. I was like, I don't even know what you're doing for your gala. I don't even know what it is. I've never been to a work gala. But yeah, so you will very rarely have to travel, but people might put that on there to just make sure that you're comfortable with it and able to. Okay. You've done a great job at your interview. I think this was great. I was actually solidly impressed, Spencer. Like, I think that you did fabulous. We'll do a couple more rounds in the future, and I will send you the interview prep doc.
Hey, thank you for all of your input and all of your time, all the work you're putting into this.
Cool. Yeah.
30 seconds left.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm trying to do better about signing
We'll
off
talk
before.
later.
Yes.
For sure. Thank
Sounds
you,
good.
Hilary.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Awesome. All right. Bye. Thank you.